Welcome to Libeth. Tonight, we turn to the people inside these diaries, not merely as historical figures, but as psychological presences moving through systems of power, desire, performance, and expectation. A brilliant observer, hiding her intelligence. A poet, refusing to suppress her emotional life. A dreamer, shaped more deeply by fiction than by reality itself. These diaries are populated not by symbols, but by consciousnesses, people rendered with enough complexity that they still feel alive 1,000 years later. Tonight, we examine the figures standing at the center of these texts and the forms of selfhood they reveal. The characters in these 3 diaries are never only themselves. They are positions within a social geometry, points in a moral argument, mirrors that the narrator is holding up to clarify something about her own situation. Understanding them this way, not simply as historical individuals, though they were that too, but as functions within the argument each diary is making, is the key to understanding what each text is actually about. And the most revealing character in each diary, without exception, is the narrator herself. Begin with Murasaki Shikibu's self-portrait, because it is one of the more complex performances of self-description in any literary tradition. She writes about herself as shy, retiring, uncomfortable at court, withdrawn from the competitive socializing that the other ladies-in-waiting pursue. She describes retreating to her quarters while the social world conducts its entertainments. She writes about feeling inferior, fraudulent, unfit for the role she is in. She insists, repeatedly and in various registers, on her own inadequacy. And then the diary unfolds, and you see what she was actually doing at court. She was watching everyone. She was analyzing every exchange, every gesture, every configuration of power with the novelist's eye that had produced Genji, and was still operating, uninterruptedly, even when she was supposed to be resting. She sketched character portraits so precise that they read, 1,000 years later, as acute psychological observation rather than period description. She understood Michinaga, the most powerful man in Japan, with a clarity that makes the diary, among other things, a document of power observed from very close range by someone with no obligation to be dazzled by it. She was the most perceptive person in any room she entered, and she knew it, and she knew that knowing it was dangerous. The self-deprecation is therefore not straightforwardly self-deprecation. It is armor. If you perform your own smallness convincingly enough, you make it harder for others to accuse you of the thing you are actually guilty of. Seeing too clearly, thinking too well, being more than the role requires. The Heian court valued women for their aesthetic accomplishments and their social grace, and it valued intelligence in women up to the point where that intelligence became inconvenient. Which is to say, up to the point where it might produce a perspective that didn't serve the interests of the people who ran things. Murasaki's intelligence was past that point by some distance. The self-deprecation was how she managed it. What punctures the self-deprecation, the one place in the diary where it falls away and something more direct takes its place, is her writing about Empress Shoshi. Murasaki's relationship with the Empress is not managed in the way her other relationships are managed. There is genuine warmth in it, genuine loyalty, genuine feeling that does not read as performed. Shoshi is young. She is only a few years into her role as Empress when the diary begins, and she is powerful within the limits of her position, which is genuinely significant even in a world where that position is ultimately contained by her father's ambitions. Murasaki's attachment to her is real, and it functions in the diary as the one anchor, the one relationship that gives the whole situation a reason that is personal rather than political or economic. She is at court partly from necessity, but she stays partly because of Shoshi. This makes Shoshi, paradoxically, both the most sympathetically rendered figure in the diary and a demonstration of the limits within which even the most powerful women operated. She is a Fujiwara instrument. Her role is to produce imperial heirs whose existence confirms her father's dominance. And she performs that role, and she is also a person who Murasaki cares about. The two things coexist. Murasaki does not need to choose between them. That is the kind of complexity the diary operates in. Against Shoshi, consider the portrait of Fujiwara no Michinaga. He appears several times, always confident, always charming, always oriented toward getting what he wants. He flirts with Murasaki. He positions himself in ways that assume the world will arrange itself around his desires, as it has done reliably throughout his life. Murasaki records all of this with a precision that is simultaneously accurate and deflating. She does not attack him. She describes him. And the description, by its very accuracy, refuses to be impressed. She can see exactly what his charm is made of, exactly what function it serves, exactly how it works, and seeing all of that removes the charm's power over her without her having to say a word about it directly. This is perhaps the most sophisticated form of critique available in a context where direct criticism of powerful men was simply not possible. You describe them accurately, and the accuracy does the work. The portrait of Izumi Shikibu, who appears briefly in Murasaki's diary in what has become one of the most discussed passages in either text, deserves special attention precisely because it is not written by Izumi and is not about Murasaki, yet tells us so much about both. Murasaki's description is brief, pointed, and carefully balanced. She acknowledges the poetry. How could she not? The poetry is genuinely extraordinary. And she qualifies the acknowledgement with a judgment about conduct that is delivered with the same composed precision she brings to everything. Brilliant poet. Questionable morals. The phrase contains, in miniature, the entire problem that the culture had with women like Izumi. That you could not quite separate the brilliance from the willingness to act on feeling, and that the same quality of intensity that produced the poetry produced the behavior the court found troubling. But read the passage carefully, and it also tells you something about Murasaki. She is drawing a line between herself and Izumi, between two possible ways of being a literary woman at court. Izumi's way is visibility, passion, the refusal to manage the inner life for other people's comfort. Murasaki's way is withdrawal, concealment, the management of visibility into something safe. The description of Izumi is not simply an assessment. It is Murasaki locating herself in relation to a different choice, and locating herself, implicitly, on the safer side of it. There is something in the description that reads as recognition, as the awareness of a woman who understands exactly what Izumi was doing and has chosen differently, and something that reads, perhaps, as a complicated form of respect that she cannot quite bring herself to express as respect. Now read Izumi Shikibu's self-portrait in her own diary, and the difference is fundamental. She is not self-deprecating. She is exposed. Where Murasaki performs smallness to protect the self that is actually large, Izumi performs nothing. She simply shows what she is. The emotional content of the diary is not managed into appropriate shapes. The grief for Tametaka is grief at full force, not aestheticized into elegance. The desire for Atsumichi is desire, present and admitted, not rendered as the conventionally acceptable longing that Heian poetry permitted. She is a woman aware of her own reputation. She knows how she is seen, and the awareness of being watched and judged is present in the text as an almost atmospheric pressure, and she declines to let that awareness determine what she writes. This is not naivety. She understands the cost. She pays it anyway. Prince Atsumichi, as Izumi renders him, is a more complex figure than the simple structure of the relationship might suggest. He is the pursuer. He initiates contact, sustains it through her resistance, uses the poem exchanges with a strategic intelligence that is not entirely separable from seduction. He has power she does not have. He is imperial, he is male, he is protected from the social consequences of the affair in ways she is not. And yet the diary does not render him as simply predatory. He is genuinely affected. The relationship changes him as well as her, or at least the diary records it as doing so. He is the archetype of the high-status man who wants the dangerous woman, but he is also, within the limits of what Izumi can know and record, a person whose desire is real. The most important figure in the Izumi diary, though, is not Atsumichi. It is Prince Tametaka, who is dead before the diary begins. Tametaka is the structural condition of everything that follows. Izumi's grief for him is the opening atmosphere of the text. It colors every page, every poem exchange, every hesitation in her response to Atsumichi's pursuit. When she hesitates to open to Atsumichi, the hesitation is not simply social calculation or standard Heian female resistance. It is the hesitation of a woman who has already lost someone who organized her inner life, who knows what it costs to invest that way, and who is not certain she can survive doing it again. Atsumichi is not replacing Tametaka. He is, in some sense, the question: is there still a self that can love after grief has done what grief does? The diary's answer is yes, cautiously, at some cost, which is as honest an answer as the question deserves. The author of the Sarashina Diary presents the most temporally extended self-portrait of the three, and therefore the most explicitly developmental. She is not the same person at the end of the diary as she is at the beginning, and the diary knows this. The child who opens the text, dreaming, avid, already saturated with Genji before she has arrived in the world, bears a clear relationship to, but is not the same as the woman who serves briefly at court, or the older woman who marries and loses and continues, or the old woman who closes the text with Buddhist regret and literary self-accusation. The diary is the record of how oneself transforms into another under the pressure of experience, and it is honest about the transformation in ways that require the retrospective form. You can only see the arc from outside it. The central other in Sarashina's diary is Genji, not Prince Atsumichi, not Empress Shoshi, but a fictional character. This is the most unusual central relationship in any of the three texts, and it is also the most direct demonstration of Sarashina's central problem. Genji is the character against whom she measures every real person she encounters, and no real person wins. The men available to her are not emotionally intelligent or aesthetically refined or physically beautiful or morally complex in the ways the novel's characters are, because no real person is, because the novel's characters were invented by the most gifted novelist in the tradition and reality was not invented by anyone. She knows this in the part of her mind that is rational. She cannot make it matter, in the part of her mind that does the comparing. The husband she eventually marries is, by the standards of the diary, barely a presence. He is described so minimally that he seems to exist in the text primarily as a function, the role of husband, rather than as a person. When he dies, the diary registers the loss, but the loss is rendered differently from the losses of the imagination, from the longing for Genji, from the disappointment of the court, which are rendered with full emotional force. He is a fact of her life, not an organizing principle of it. Genji was the organizing principle. That no real person could occupy the space that a fictional character had claimed is both the diary's central tragedy and its most honest observation. Among the characters in these 3 diaries, there is also, running through all of them, the social world as a collective character. The court, the community of ladies-in-waiting, the ambient judgment of other people. In each diary, this collective presence has a different valence. In Murasaki's diary, the social world is a community she cannot quite join, present, surrounding, requiring participation she cannot give fully. The other ladies-in-waiting are observed, sketched, their various strategies for navigating the court noted with precision. They are not enemies. They are simply people whose relationship to the social world she inhabits is more comfortable than her own, and that comfort is itself a form of distance between herself and them. In Izumi's diary, the social world is an audience and a judge, not a community but a surveillance. The court's attention to her relationship with Atsumichi is not the attention of people who care about her, but the attention of people for whom her situation is interesting in ways that have nothing to do with her welfare. In Sarashina's diary, the social world is, above all, the longed-for thing that turns out to be smaller than the longing. The court she imagined, glittering and full of significance, revealed on arrival to be ordinary, political, limited. This comparison reveals something precise about what each woman was experiencing. Murasaki was inside the world she couldn't join, the alienation of the insider. Izumi was outside the protection the world could have provided, the exposure of the person who chose visibility over safety. Sarashina was the person who wanted in and found, on arrival, that what she'd wanted didn't exist, the disillusionment of the idealist. 3 kinds of relationship to the same institution. 3 different forms of distance from the version of the world that each woman needed it to be. The cross-diary character of Izumi, her appearance as a figure in Murasaki's diary, while she exists as the author of her own, is the richest single comparative point in the entire 3-text corpus. In Murasaki's version, she is defined by 2 qualities in tension, the brilliant and the questionable. In her own version, she is defined by a 3rd quality that Murasaki's account cannot see from outside, the necessary. She did what she did because it was who she was, because the alternative was to stop being that person, because managing herself into the shape the court required would have cost her the thing that made her Izumi Shikibu at all. Murasaki saw the scandal. Izumi was living the inside of the reason for it. The gap between those 2 perspectives is not a gap between accuracy and inaccuracy. Both perspectives are accurate. It is the gap between how a person looks from outside and what they are living from inside, which is among the most important gaps these diaries were built to document. What gives these diaries their unusual emotional force is that no character remains entirely reducible to a role. The Empress is both political instrument and vulnerable human being. The lover is both desire and danger. The observer is both detached and wounded. Even the narrators themselves remain unstable, divided between performance and private truth. These women understood something literature would spend centuries rediscovering: that human beings are internally contradictory, and that consciousness itself is difficult to simplify. That's all for tonight on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.